It's always showtime at BetMGM Sports. You can make your first bet risk-free up to $1,000 when you sign up with the code Sherdog. Don't let another game day go by without having the ultimate sports betting app in the palm of your hand. Discover non-stop excitement with BetMGM's state-of-the-art technology and dozens of betting options, including live wagers, props, parlays, and much more. No matter what your favourite sport is or how you like to wager, find out why there's nothing like getting a W at the king of sportsbooks. Use the code Sherdog and make your first bet risk-free up to $1,000. Download the BetMGM app and sign up today. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Arizona, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, New Jersey, Nevada, New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, or Wyoming only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire in 7 days from issuance. Excludes Michigan disassociated persons. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, Washington, D.C., Louisiana, Nevada, Wyoming, and Virginia. Call 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help. In Michigan, 1-800-GAMBLER. In Illinois, Indiana, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 800-889-9789. In Mississippi, call 1-888-777-9696. Sports betting is void where prohibited. Promotional offers not available in Nevada. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show. Me, Sean Sheehan, here on Sherdog.com. And today I am joined by fellow MMA media member Harry Powell, all the way over there in London, but via Wales, to talk about Jon Jones and to kind of update the situation and how we feel, I suppose, in Jon Jones. We actually did a similar one, Harry, around Christmas, and we were talking about Jones and we were talking about, where he might go and what he might do. But I think a lot has changed since then, obviously, with the Stipe matchup. And we want to look at it from another angle. The first angle I want to look at it from, Harry, and I very appreciate you joining me today, is maybe the technical side and how Jon Jones' game has changed. And I know you just started your new podcast over in Severe May One Man Boot, where you look at like the technical aspects of fighters, and the episode is already out from last week with Carla versus Rose, the premonition of that fight, I suppose, if you want to say it like that. So no better man to talk about the technical aspects of Jon Jones. And we'll talk about the drama, we'll talk about the matchmaking, we'll talk about what he's going to do, the change in camps and everything like that in a second. But I want to talk about that technical aspects of Jon Jones, because I was on the podcast with John Anik and Kenny Florian there a week ago, and I kind of mentioned kind of loosely, and it's just something I have said before, and I think you have said it before as well. When you look at, say, the judging side of the game, Jon Jones's game today isn't as effective as it once was in terms of the judging. And I think, it's funny enough, but the way like the judges now is actually kind of correlated to how the game has gone in terms of landing big, effective shots. We saw, with Chito Vera versus Rob Font in a very, very open, obvious way. What are your thoughts? First of all, we'll forget about the effectiveness of a second, but we will talk about the effectiveness of Jon Jones' game. But Jon Jones' game overall, everyone calls him the greatest of all time. What are your thoughts on, go as long as you want to hear, the ground game, the overall game, the striking game of Jon Jones?
So I'm definitely not going to get into a conversation about the greatest of all time, because I think it's fucking arduous.
Yeah, I agree.
Jon Jones's game, however, before the if we take judging out of it completely, yes, right? In a MMA fight whereby you're looking at skill for skill, somebody being able to land and either not get hit back or not get taken down or not be out-grappled or not be submitted, Jon Jones's game is about as close to perfect as you could probably get, right? Now, we must talk about Jon Jones skill for skill at light heavyweight. We've never seen him in a heavyweight fight in the UFC. So we don't really know. We also don't know what his skills are going to look like when he comes back. Is he going to be better? Is he in that training camp with Henry Cejudo? Is he going to have learned more skills? Is he going to have learned less? Is he going to have let go of some stuff? Is he going to refine some stuff? We don't know. We certainly know that the progression of Jon Jones went from, the wild man with all the confidence in the world, willing to try mad, crazy submissions, mad spinning kicks, mad takedowns, all of this sort of stuff in the early run to the title. But since then, he became more of a point fighter, right? More of a cerebral 1 or 2, 3, 4 shot combo fighter, long, rangy, on the outside, trips and flicks on the inside. And I think the thing that I enjoy the most about Jon Jones's technical attributes is he knows exactly who he is as a fighter. He knows how his body works. You watch the jab, you watch the straight shots, you watch the oblique kicks, you watch the way that he sets up the left high kick on Daniel Cormier. You watch the way that he fights. He knows exactly who he is. Against Gustafsson, the in transition takedowns. Against Ovin St. Preux, although it wasn't the performance we're used to with Jon Jones, look at the way that he implemented angles in that fight. Look at the way that he was able to stand in the pocket and not get touched anywhere near as much as you'd expect somebody who just was willingly able to stand in the pocket when he was. I think the thing that Jon Jones has in spades, aside from being an ultra athlete, we know about his brothers and we know what sort of athletes they are, is his cerebral capacity to fight. Now, how do I explain that? I explain that in a way that outside the cage, he knows what a jab looks like. He knows what a right hand looks like. He knows what a takedown looks like. But it's his ability to implement those things in the chaos and at the right times. That, I think, is my favorite thing about Jon Jones's technical skill set.
That's a very interesting thing because, I actually hadn't thought about it the way you said it there about, he was more of a wild fighter earlier on in his career, throwing those spinning back elbows and wilder stuff. And, he will still incorporate a little bit of that, I'm sure, and has in recent fights, but definitely not as much. And, I've always thought that Jon Jones has become a better fighter throughout his career, but that means a more tactical fighter, I suppose. I honestly think you said he was kind of a natural wild man in, inside and outside of the cage. I think he is absolutely to a certain point. I think you would probably agree to a certain point as well. But I also think he's kind of a natural tactician, if that makes sense. Like, to me, if you said you don't want to get into the greatest of all time debate, and I don't either. But to me, I don't think there's any debate who's the smartest MMA fighter to ever live. And I think that is Jon Jones. I really do. I think his game plan, his ability, people say with Greg Jackson and everything, and we will get to the camp debate later on because I think that's a fascinating talking point as he goes into his next fight. If he does go into his next fight, we will see. But I think that has really been a thing. And, the adjustment from a wild, cerebral fighter, to use your turn of phrase, with a great tactical nous, to a fighter now who maybe isn't as wild, maybe isn't as cerebral in terms of, go out to the example I always use is Rory McDonald versus BJ Penn. He's gone out there to devastate this guy. Jon Jones was partly that, but also devastate you in your kind of game plan. I think now he's very much a set game plan type of fighter. And to be honest, I don't know if that is a good thing. Now, we've analysed where he has been, what he's come to, and how good he is. But I wonder in modern mixed martial arts if that is as effective. We've spoken about it on other podcasts, and I've spoken about before how I don't know, maybe people won't agree with me, but I think MMA is reaching a stage where the level of ability is so good that the tough, hard bastards, for the want of a better word, are going to actually take the sport at the very top level if everything else is even. And I would put power into that as well. I don't think, not to say Jon Jones is not tough. He's one of, very, very tough, but he's not, he's not Darren Elkins sort of tough. That sort of thing. And I don't think he has that massive power either. Now, we will talk about heavyweight in a second, but I wonder, is that guy, and it's a funny thing to say about Jon Jones, about, is he is he almost too good? No, like sometimes I always, that phrase paralysis by analysis, and it's usually talking about your opponent, you know, and you get kind of paralyzed thinking about them and you do nothing yourself. I wonder, has Jon Jones actually thought too much about himself, and it's kind of brought his game to a point where he needs a bit of a change? And maybe the heavyweight is that change, but having watched those last two fights, Harry, the Thiago Santos and the Dominic Reyes fight, two lads who haven't gone on to do great things since, let's be honest here, two good top 10, top 7 or 8 fighters in the division, but you would expect Jon Jones to kind of run through those guys. Why? What do you think is the reason why he didn't? And do you think that's kind of a fundamental worsening of his game, maybe?
So the honest answer is I don't know. Now, we don't know. We just don't know where Jon Jones is, right? I think there's a large point here, so bear with me. But I think Jon Jones spent a lot of his career lying, right? Playing a character, playing the come to Jesus, I'm this wonderful whatever human, when actually I think we're all pretty confident that there's at least a large percentage of Jon Jones that isn't that. There is a man that's been embroiled in case after case after case after case with the law, and whether that's just a certain failing of his surroundings or his childhood or whatever, you know, the come to Jesus thing, the saintly perfect person, is a fallacy. Now, we also have said, and I've heard you say this before, that in the cage, Jon Jones is a bully, right? And that's what makes him so prominent and so dominant in his fights, is he doesn't allow people to come in and start their game. We've seen so many times in his run to the title, he'll come in and he'll fight somebody else's fight. Wherever they're strongest, he's going to take you there and win. He's a bully. Now, what do we know about bullies? We know bullies are often narcissistic. We know that they're often egotistical. I think there's a really interesting question to be answered about where Jon Jones is and who Jon Jones is for himself in these next couple of fights. Is it just that he's missed a step now at light heavyweight? He's not as quick as he once was. People have seen so much tape of him that they kind of know what game he's bringing, and they know that by the judging criteria, if you land power over a guy that doesn't have a massive amount of power, you're going to win on the judges' scorecards. Does that then make Jon Jones more tentative, less tentative? And this, I think, has why the move to heavyweight has so much jeopardy and so much intrigue for me personally, because you don't find volume fighters like Jon Jones at heavyweight. The closest you're going to find is somebody like Ciryl Gane, right? And again, he's a very different type of fighter to Jon Jones. But you are going to find guys like Francis Ngannou or Derek Lewis, who may throw 6 punches around. But if one of them lands, you're staring up at the lights, getting transported to hospital in the next 15 minutes. So I think the question for me is he moving to heavyweight for money? Is he moving to heavyweight because he knows his ego can't stand to stay at light heavyweight and lose against fighters that, let's be honest, aren't amazing, but are quicker and can hit just as hard as some of the heavyweights? Or is he moving to heavyweight because he knows that the fighters are slower? He knows that the gas tanks are worse. He knows that his ability to implement his game, albeit a hit and not get hit game plan, will work for him in a better way. I don't know. We're going to find out. It's
a very interesting one because as you were saying there about, comparing him to other fighters in that division, look, I think it's funny. The two that stand out to me are Gane, as you mentioned there, but as you said as well, a very different type of fighter. Jon Jones is not light on his feet on the outside. He is more, to borrow a phrase from Conor McGregor, stuck in the mud, although with beautiful footwork and beautiful movement. Beautiful. You'd compare Gane to someone like a Wonder Boy or so, or whatever. I actually think, and this might be a weird comparison, but it's only because he fought last week, and it's only because I said it about him. Andrei Arlovski, I think, is a little bit of a comparison to Jon Jones in terms of how he fights at heavyweight. Because I made the point, and I actually...
Jeez, that's fucking ruthless, that is. Jesus Christ.
No, but it's a compliment to both guys, and I'll tell you why. Now, I've said this point a couple of times, and I'm actually waiting for someone to tell me why I'm wrong, to be honest, because I'm open to being wrong about this. But I think Andrei Arlovski has had such long-term success at the heavyweight division of mixed martial arts because he is a better athlete than almost everyone. Like, who else in that division, if you think about it, can kind of jab on the outside, can move their head quick enough to not get knocked out in 6 fights in a row, can stay safe enough? Now, athleticism with ability, with technical ability, with tactical ability, has brought Andrei Arlovski to a fantastic middle-of-the-road heavyweight career in the last 6 or 7 years. He had a top-of-the-lane heavyweight career 25 years ago, whenever it was, or 17 years ago, whenever it might be. But the point there is, I'm not saying Jon Jones on the verge or the same level as Andrei Arlovski. I'm saying that sort of fighter that you would expect Jon Jones to be in the heavyweight division can have success up until a certain point. Like Andrei Arlovski, if you put him in there against Ngannou, that athleticism is not going to work. Against Gane, it's not going to work. Even against Derek Lewis, it's probably not going to work. Against Stipe, it's not going to work because those guys are more athletic. So the thing about Jon Jones is, what is going to separate him from them at the very, very top? Now, if you look at it, right, and you said, imagine if it was a better version of Arlovski. Could he do it against him? A younger, even faster, even more athletic version than him. Maybe what Jon Jones might be. Like, can Jon Jones do to heavyweights what he did to light heavyweights? And you used the word speed there earlier on. And speed is one of the most important factors in mixed martial arts. So is power. Like, it feels like it's going to be one of those that wins. And that's, to me, why this move to heavyweight is the most intriguing thing we have in mixed martial arts these days. And I'll throw it over to you, and you can talk about heavyweight in a second. You talk about maybe what the move to heavyweight will mean to Jon Jones. But it feels like, right, and a lot of people I know, some people listening to this will have only seen 1 or 2 Jon Jones fights because he's only fought 1 or 2 times, or maybe 3 or 4 times in the last 5 or 6 years. And a lot of people came into the sport during the pandemic and with McGregor and things like that. So you mightn't realise how good Jon Jones is and what he is. But trust me to say it, Jon Jones is one of, if not the best technical fighters in the history of the sport. One of, if not the best tactical fighters in the history of the sport. And you're putting him into a division with Francis Ngannou, one of, if not the hardest puncher in the history of the sport. Stipe Miocic, if not the best heavyweight of all time, very, very close to it. And other people as well, like Ciryl Gane, to me, one of the best fighters in the history of the world that we've ever seen. And I don't care what happened in the Francis fight, he will be back and he's brilliant. I'd love to see that matchup. And I'm like, the key there, and my point there is to see Jon Jones against a power puncher like Francis Ngannou, to an all-time great like Stipe Miocic, to someone who can match Jon Jones' size and athleticism in the way that Ciryl Gane fights, to match that against Jon Jones. We've never seen anything like that before at light heavyweight, and that's the key. That's why I am dying to see this. On the last podcast we talked about Jon Jones outside of the cage, and if you don't want to see Jon Jones because if he's outside of the cage, he's personal stuff, I have no problem with you. But if you don't want to see him inside of the cage, if you're just thinking about that, it's a crazy one. Talk to me, Harry, about the heavyweight move, because we've seen guys move division to division, and at the lighter weights I think it's a little bit different because it is, adding on maybe a small little bit of muscle, or taking away a bit, or just dropping that extra bit of comfort weight maybe that you have there, to go from Jon Jones, who was probably like 225 at light heavyweight and cutting down to 205, to then go up and be a muscular, healthy 240 to 45 maybe. That is a lot, because it's not only putting on, you could say, he's putting on 20 pounds. It's like putting on 35, 40 pounds, I think, there for Jon Jones. And we spoke about on on one of the podcasts recently about there's no pictures or anything. I saw a picture of Jon Jones, and I don't know, he doesn't look that muscular. I don't know if you saw that picture or not. How do you think that heavyweight move will benefit Jon Jones? You mentioned the word speed earlier on. You mentioned the word power. We look at Cormier when he went up. It seemed like he had more power. 2 questions. Will Jones have more power? Will he have less speed, though?
The answer is probably yes to both. I think one of the most impressive things about Jones, it was his speed, but it was also his timing, right? Now, Conor McGregor will tell you that speed matters not when you have timing. But everything you said about Jones being one of the most technical and one of the most tactical fighters is exactly why everyone loved him. Because it wasn't just raw athleticism and it wasn't just raw ability that meant that he could go in and dominate guys in the realm that they were strongest. It was because he was able to make such intelligent reads and he was able to keep himself safe whilst landing crazy amounts of volume and damage on the other person, whether that be from a grappling perspective or a striking perspective. Does he lose speed at heavyweight? Almost certainly. Right? We have seen a number of guys go up and say, I wasn't used to the weight class, more in boxing than in MMA, but I wasn't used to the weight class. I blew my gas tank. I didn't have, Conor in the first Diaz fight, right? He said, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for 170. I wasn't ready for this extra weight. I wasn't ready to move around this vehicle like I was a 145 or a 155 pounder. And that's a very real thing. But Conor did that in a matter of months, and Jones is doing that in a matter of years. So you'd expect him to be far more comfortable at the weight. Now, in terms of him looking big, frankly, I think Jon Jones is deceptive because I've never seen him in real life. But you look at him, I have seen Alexander Gustafsson in real life, right? And that man is a fucking giant. And then you look at him again next to Jon Jones, and you realize that Jon Jones and Gustafsson are kind of the same build. But then you look at Jon Jones at whatever he is now, 240, 250, whatever he is, and he doesn't look any different. But I can almost guarantee if you saw him in real life, he'd look like a fucking giant. Now, does he hit harder? Yeah, inevitably he must be hitting harder, right? He's going to be squatting a lot. He's going to be deadlifting a lot. He's going to be pressing a lot. Without a doubt, the power generation in those muscles is going to be far greater than what it was at light heavyweight. Is it going to mean that he could put someone dead with one shot like a Francis Ngannou? I doubt it. The thing that Jones used to do so brilliantly is fire his shots accurately. If you want to see one of the cleanest left hooks of left high kicks of all time, it's not Krokop. Go and have a look at Jon Jones on Daniel Cormier. The way he sets it up and then eventually lands it is phenomenal. It's beautiful and it's right on the button. So the biggest question to me in this move to heavyweight is, can he implement the game plan he has against more dangerous strikers? At heavyweight, what I mean by more dangerous is from a power perspective. At light heavyweight, guys like Reyes, who were a great athlete, but good boxing, but didn't offer massive one-hitter quitter power, they managed to get to him. Right? They had the speed, they had the athleticism, they had the footwork. Of the guys you've mentioned at heavyweight, and I guess this is kind of why it's intriguing to me as well, and I'll ask you this question, is like, who do you think they give Jon Jones? Is it Stipe? Is it somebody else? Because you're going to throw him in against the elite of the elite immediately because he's Jon Jones. And we're going to find out very, very quickly if a good athlete like Stipe, who's able to hit hard and is able to wrestle and is able to transition well, is going to be able to be too much for the Jon Jones style, or are we going to see a completely revolutionary Jon Jones? I just don't know.
It's an interesting one. That was kind of the point I was going to bring it to as well, because I remember speaking about this, a year and a half ago maybe, when Jones was talking about going to heavyweight and they were saying, oh, you're not getting an immediate title shot, all this. And I was saying, like, I would love to see him fight Derek Lewis. Get a feel for the heavyweight division. Get a feel for someone who's 265 pounds soaking wet after the weigh-in and probably 280 pounds on fight night. Get a feel for how he can manage someone like that with someone who's not going to bring, too tough of a challenge for him, I wouldn't think, for Jon Jones. And that's nothing against Derek Lewis. That's how good Jon Jones is. And
absolutely.
Let's see how that goes. But as you said there, he's Jon Jones, so he's probably going to go into a title fight or an interim title fight or whatever it might be. I just wonder, like, I've always thought down through the years that Stipe and Jon Jones would be a great fight, and Stipe would want to be one of the only guys who can challenge him. I never thought there was anyone at light heavyweight really, apart from Gustafsson from the first fight, and then we saw the second fight. It wasn't much of a challenge. I never thought Cormier had the ability to trouble Jon Jones in many ways, to be honest, although he did a little bit at the start of the second fight. But I always thought Jon Jones's at his apex, the issues were going to be at heavyweight. Now, there's another debate, and maybe it's one for another podcast. Is Jon Jones still at the top of his game in terms of, like, he's been around for a long time, but also he's been inactive multiple times for long times, and I don't think that helps someone either. But on your point there about the matchup, it feels like Stipe would have been a good one. Now, Stipe wants to kind of put it back to September or something like that. Honestly, and this is maybe the reason why I kind of suggested doing this podcast today, I think Jon Jones needs to move on from that. Honestly, and I think the UFC need to move on from it. Now, the UFC have been very good at moving on from fights recently and just getting another fight going, right? Look at when Francis said, I want to fight in August instead of June or whatever it was. And then they're right, Grant, let's make an interim fight. And Gane fought whoever Gane fought, and they had an interim belt. If Stipe says he doesn't want to fight and Jon Jones does, let's make Jon Jones versus Gane. Let's make Jon Jones versus Tuivasa. And I know those lads have been made in other fights, but I'm talking about a week ago or whenever this kind of news came out. Jon Jones has been away for long enough, and I think he needs to be in there and he needs to be fighting whoever the matchup is. I think if you take out Gane, if you take out Ngannou, I actually don't really think the matchup matters that much. I think Stipe is the best of those potential matchups, but if he went in there against Lewis, against Tuivasa, against anyone else in that division, just top ranked to get a fight, to get an interim title fight, to set up the possible Francis fight, I think that'd make a lot of sense, because we'd see Jon Jones at that weight and we would see where he would go. Now, having said that, that's because it's seemingly the Francis option is off the table. If the Francis option was on the table, I would go for Jon Jones versus Francis straight away, because I think the boat has sailed on the Derek Lewis kind of warm-up fight to get the heavyweight. I think that was an option for a year and a half ago, and I think if you're putting him in a fight now, it has to be a title fight or it has to be an interim title fight. And look, the Francis title fight would be the way to go, but that doesn't look like it is. And I'll get your thoughts on that in a second, but one or two last points here before we close it up. What do you think, and this is talking about how he might face against someone like a Stipe at heavyweight or whoever he faces at heavyweight, and Jon Jones having a point to prove, because I felt like, and we spoke about it at the start of this podcast, himself and Greg Jackson and that gym have created this fighter to be, you use the word cerebral, technical, tactically brilliant fighter. Now he's left that gym and he's training, with Henry Cejudo and all of those guys. And so the 2 points there, I wonder, and I'll throw it at you. How do you think that change will affect him in terms of his technical and tactical ability, training with a different gym? And you probably know more about that gym than I do. That's not the sort of thing I'd pay too much attention to. But also, how much do you think Jon Jones will want to prove a point that these guys who threw me out, I want to prove that it was never them the whole time, it was me the whole time, and you know what, even if I come out and have a better performance, if I'm blowing the guys away, knocking guys out at heavyweight, it'll prove that they were holding me back a bit.
Yeah, so that's definitely a wrinkle that I'm very interested in. I'm kind of in the same boat as you, that I don't look too much at gyms, but it's undeniable to say that there's something happening down there with what Henry Cejudo has going on. A number of fighters have actively sought him out and have come out and had some good results, right? The Rose and Whaley second fight was very close. Figueiredo and Moreno, the latest fight, was very, very close. And it seems as though he definitely has a way of articulating points with Eric Albarracin and molding or adding things to a fighter. A little bit like Jason Perillo does, right? You don't go necessarily to Jason Perillo as an absolute amateur nobody and he turns you into a world champion. But what he can do is take somebody either at the apex of their career, like a Cyborg or a Bisping, that's sort of coming down the other end, and add stuff onto their game to keep their longevity up and whatever. And it seems like Henry Cejudo's doing that a little bit. Obviously, he's an unbelievable grappler, and he's added the striking on in that realm. But in answer to the question, I think you're absolutely right that Jon Jones will feel like he has something to prove, because we know that Jon Jones is a guy with a massive ego. I also wonder whether there's a wrinkle here about, because of the lack of activity and because of the amount of fans that the UFC garnered during the lockdown because there was no other sport, I wonder whether in Jon Jones's head he feels like nobody actually knows who I am anymore.
So true.
I fought Thiago Santos on no legs, essentially, right? And I fought you said it
Dominic
earlier,
Reyes.
I forgot who it was. Thank you, Dominic Reyes. I even mentioned him earlier, useless. I fought Dominic Reyes, and both of those were close enough fights. They didn't do massive pay-per-view numbers. So does anyone actually really care? That's my question. And I wonder whether Jon Jones feels the same. Now, like,
I think he definitely does.
In terms of right.
If you look at Jon Jones's character, I think it's hard to deny that, because he is someone who undoubtedly cares. Like, I don't think he's the most self-confident in terms of being happy with himself.
The bully thing, right?
Yeah, exactly that. So do you think that'll play a factor as well?
100% I do. Like, and this, I wonder whether the price negotiation here was a way for him to try and stall the UFC. Now, this is me putting my Eddie Bravo tinfoil hat on, right? So bear with me. But like, if Jon Jones, I think, needs to answer the question for himself, right? Because in Henry Cejudo's training camp, how many elite level heavyweights are there? I don't think there are any. Oh, yeah. Right? Are there some good bodies that he can bring in? Yeah, of course, it's Jon Jones. He's got bags of money. He can fly lads in, no problem. But how are you going to replicate Ciryl Gane? How are you going to replicate Francis Ngannou? How are you going to replicate Stipe Miocic in a lot of ways, right? Like, the way that Stipe does things is very basic, and that's not disrespectful at all. That's actually a compliment. But it's hard to replicate the level at which he does it. And I think my read on it is Jon Jones wanted the warm-up fight, right? He wanted to say to the UFC, I want 10 million to fight Francis Ngannou. And they're like, no fucking way. We'll give you Derek Lewis. And he's like, okay, I'll take that. And if he loses to Derek Lewis, then he doesn't have to go and fight to a Francis Ngannou or a Ciryl Gane or whatever. Like, the fight I would have liked to have seen, at least at this, I know that he's supposedly now booked or whatever, but let's see him against Tom Aspinall. Let's see that.
Oh, poor old Tom Aspinall. I don't know that the best match.
But is it though? Yeah, like let's just look. Like, we've got all these questions about where Jon Jones is. Mm-hmm. Is he going to be slower? Is he going to hit us? Is he going to hit harder? Is his grappling going to still stand up? What about the gas tank? What about is he going to move his feet as much? He's carrying all this extra weight. Does the footwork still hold up? Is he? But you look at Tom Aspinall, who's a natural heavyweight, moves very, very agile for a big man, hits hard, has some good fight IQ, and can grapple. That's an interesting test for me for Jon Jones.
Definitely.
And if he goes and wins, like, to us as the hardcores, that's an insanely huge win.
Yeah.
That's a fight.
It's a good fight. It's a good fight. I don't know. It's a little bit unfair on Tom Aspinall, but I would look. I would watch that fight. Look, I think there's, and just one final point here on your point about, Jon Jones, the money kind of holding him back from making that move or whatever. I actually think the move in gym and him wanting to prove that point has actually taken the money question out of it a little bit, because I haven't heard about Jon Jones being given the 10 million or the 15 million that he wants to fight for heavyweight. He was just going to fight against Stipe. He was just going to fight against Francis. And why is that? What has changed? The only thing that has changed in that is the move to gym and the point of proof. But look, we could talk about this for 5 hours, and we've done 2 podcasts on it now. Let's park another one for maybe next Christmas, and we'll talk about it again. Hopefully,
can I throw one thing in though?
Go on.
One thing in?
Yes, indeed.
The one thing I will say now. In very recent terms, Dana has not shot himself in a great light with this whole boxing is overpaid thing. But one thing that Dana does do well is he has a great relationship. And what I mean by a great relationship is he knows how the top fighters work. If he whispers in Jon Jones's ear a little bit to be like, we're not going to give you 10 mil because nobody knows who you are anymore. Does that light a fire under Jon Jones's belly? Like, where are we here? Does Dana have a little whisper in the ear? Like, yeah.
Who was the fighter? Was it GSP that said they needed to reintroduce to the public? Was it GSP? That's the most ridiculous thing of all time, man.
That's hilarious. It's hilarious.
It was it GSP? Jesus, it was someone. Yeah, I think it was. But honestly, so. It could have been something like that to Jon Jones, because like, as we said it before, I think mentally Jon Jones is like extremely strong inside the cage. But outside the cage and just thinking about like himself, I just don't think. I think that's his biggest flaw. Honestly, I think. And look, that's been a massive flaw for some of the greats in sport down through the years. You know, snooker example, Hurricane Higgins. Probably no one in America listening will know about that. But you know, George Best, Mike Tyson. Yeah, it's always, and it's why some of those characters are fascinating, you know, in bad ways too, like Tyson and like Jones. But it's, you know, America loves a comeback story. And if Jon Jones came back and he went and won the World Heavyweight Championship, what a comeback story that would be. But look, we have that to look forward to over the next couple of months. Harry, I really appreciate it. Follow him over on Twitter at BJJ_Harry Powell. Is that correct? Did I get it right?
That is absolutely bang on. Yeah, well done.
Check out the One Man Boot and check out all of Harry's great stuff over on the Ciryl.com and over on the Patreon as well. A great man and one of the best voices, one of the best technical analysts in the sport. The Welsh Dan Hardy, I've started to call him now. So check him out. And thank you all for listening and watching. Hit the thumbs up button. Hit the subscribe button. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com. And I'll see you all next time.